You know, sometimes life sends us a message so subtle, so quiet, that we almost miss it. But every now and then, God speaks in a way that stops us in our tracks. And on January 20th, 2026, that message was simple, but powerful. One day of happiness is coming. Now, when I first heard that, I didn't imagine fireworks or miracles falling from the sky. I imagined something deeper, a shift, a moment, a breath where everything suddenly feels possible again. And maybe that's what today is about. Not predicting the future, but preparing our hearts for the happiness we've been too tired, too busy, or too discouraged to expect. Because if God is sending a signal, if the universe is whispering hope, then maybe, just maybe, this is the day we choose to listen. When God says that one day of happiness is coming, it changes the way you breathe, the way you stand, the way you look at the ordinary moments you once rushed past. It changes the way you walk through January 20th, 2026, because suddenly this day becomes more than a date on a calendar. It becomes a reminder, a signal, a quiet nudge from something bigger than us, whispering that the heaviness you've been carrying is not the whole story, that the gray skies you've learned to live under are not permanent, that the silence you've mistaken for abandonment might actually be preparation. And when you hear that message, when your heart even slightly opens to the idea that happiness is on its way, you start noticing things differently. You notice the way the morning light touches the floor as if trying to tell you there's still softness in this world. You notice the way a stranger's smile feels warmer than usual, as if kindness has been waiting for its turn to speak. You notice the way your own heartbeat feels a little less tired than the week before. And maybe none of these things would matter on their own. Maybe they're easy to overlook, easy to dismiss, easy to call coincidences. But when God has already told you that one day of happiness is coming, suddenly these tiny moments don't feel random anymore. They feel like hints, like pieces of a puzzle slowly aligning, like the universe clearing its throat before delivering something meaningful. But it's not just the world outside you that begins to shift. Something inside shifts too. You start standing a little lighter. You start believing that maybe, just maybe, you haven't missed your chance. That the best parts of your story aren't behind you. That happiness isn't something reserved for other people, for the lucky ones, for the untouched, the unbroken, the unscarred. Because when God says one day of happiness is coming, He doesn't add conditions. He doesn't say it's only for the ones who got everything right. He doesn't say it's only for the ones who never doubted, never fell, never cried themselves to sleep. The message is for anyone who chooses to hear it, anyone brave enough to receive it, anyone willing to believe that even the most wounded heart can still be surprised by joy. And the truth is, many of us don't know how to handle a promise like that. Happiness sounds beautiful, but it also sounds fragile, unrealistic, dangerous even, because hoping for happiness means risking disappointment. It means giving yourself permission to imagine something better than what you've settled for. It means looking at the walls you've built to protect yourself and admitting that maybe they've also been keeping happiness out. So when you hear the promise that one day of happiness is coming, it's natural to hesitate, to wonder if it's for real, to wonder if you're worthy of it, to wonder if opening your heart again is asking for heartbreak all over. But that's exactly where the transformation begins. Because the moment you hear this promise requires courage. The moment you let yourself believe it, even a little, something starts to heal, something starts to lift. You begin walking differently, not because the world has changed, but because you're finally allowing yourself to expect something good. And expectation is powerful. Expectation turns survival into anticipation. It turns waiting into preparation. It turns a day like January 20th, 2026 into a symbol of everything you've endured and everything you're becoming. Think about how much of life is shaped by expectation. If you expect the worst, you move carefully, nervously, defensively. You slow down. You hide parts of yourself. You shrink your dreams because you don't want them head. But when you expect something good, even one single day of happiness, you begin to expand again. You begin to breathe more deeply. You begin to walk with the quiet confidence that something is on its way, even if you can't see it yet. And that shift alone can change your entire life, because happiness doesn't arrive in a vacuum. It doesn't drop suddenly into a heart that's closed off. It needs space. It needs room. It needs a softened spirit. And that softening happens the moment you believe that what's coming is worth preparing for. So you start to release things, old anger, old disappointments, old comparisons, old fears you've rehearsed so many times they become part of your identity. Because if one day of happiness is coming, you don't want your hands full of what hurts you. You make space, not because you're already happy, but because you're getting ready to receive what's on its way. And this preparation doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, simple, almost invisible. It looks like getting out of bed even when life feels heavy. It looks like forgiving someone who will never apologize. It looks like choosing not to quit on yourself even after too many setbacks to count. It looks like taking responsibility for your healing, not because it's easy, but because you've decided you're worthy of the life that healing makes possible. And every one of those decisions is a form of faith. A small declaration that says, if happiness is coming, I'm going to be die for it. But the real transformation happens when you realize that the promise of a future moment of happiness starts shaping your present. Because knowing something good is ahead changes the way you face the challenges in front of you. Suddenly the obstacles feel less permanent. The frustrations feel less defining. The delays feel less like dead ends and more like detours you'll eventually be thankful for. You stop treating every setback like a final chapter and start treating it like a tense moment in the middle of a story that's still unfolding. And when you walk through life with that mindset, when you walk forward knowing happiness is coming, you stop rushing, you stop panicking, you stop forcing things, you start trusting the process, you start seeing value even in the days that don't feel exciting. Because if the promise is real, then even the difficulties are shaping you for the day ahead. Even the long nights are teaching you something about yourself. Even the loneliness is making space for connections that will mean more later. You become patient with yourself, patient with life, patient with the slow unfolding of your story. And on days when you feel tired, on days when the promise feels distant, on days when doubts feel louder than hope, you remind yourself, God didn't say maybe. He didn't say possibly. He didn't say if you meet certain conditions. He said one day of happiness is coming, which means it's not just a wish, it's an appointment, an event all read. Why written into the calendar of your life, even if the date is hidden from you. And that certainty changes everything. It turns hope into something you can lean on. It turns waiting into something meaningful. It turns the present into an active part of the miracle, not just the empty space before it arrives. The beauty of the promise is that it doesn't require you to be perfect. It doesn't require you to be fearless. It doesn't require you to pretend everything is okay. You can carry your flaws and still be on your way to happiness. You can carry your doubts and still be moving toward joy. You can carry your past and still walk into a future that's brighter than anything you imagine, because the promise isn't based on what you've earned. It's based on what's been spoken over your life. And maybe that's the most powerful part of all. Once a promise like that has been spoken, it can't be undone by your mistakes. It can't be canceled by your failures. It can't be stolen by your fears. It stands unshaken even when everything else feels unstable. And holding on to that truth gives you strength you didn't know you had. It gives you resilience that surprises even you. It gives you a reason to get up on days when getting up feels impossible. Because if happiness is coming, you don't want to miss it. You don't want to sleep through your own breakthrough. You don't want to be so discouraged that you fail to notice the moment joy finally taps you on the shoulder. So instead of giving you you keep going. Instead of closing off, you open a little more. Instead of doubting everything, you let yourself believe one thing, that happiness is coming, and believing that one thing begins to unlock everything else. It gives you courage to take the next step, even when you're unsure. It gives you strength to release what no longer serves you. It gives you hope that your story still has chapters left to surprise you. It gives you patience for the unfolding of the unseen. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin walking like someone who expects goodness. And the world responds to people who walk like that. Opportunities appear that once hid from you. People show up who reflect the new energy you're carrying. Choices become clearer. Paths become smoother. You become more present, more grounded, more open to the subtle beauty woven into the ordinary. And all of this begins not with the arrival of happiness, but with the belief that it is on its way. Because it's that belief that shifts your posture. It's that belief that softens your heart. It's that belief that changes how you interpret everything around you. And once that shift begins, you become aligned with the very happiness you're waiting for. And even before the promised day arrives, you start to feel small sparks of it in your everyday life. A laugh that feels fuller than usual. A moment of peace you weren't expecting. A breakthrough in a place you felt stuck. A sense of clarity that cuts through confusion. And Peace moments aren't the destination, they're the previews. They're the first drops of rain before the storm of joy. They're the signs that you're on the right path. They're the proof that what was spoken is already unfolding, even if slowly, even if quietly. And the more you notice these moments, the more they multiply. Not because life is suddenly perfect, but because your heart is finally awake to what was always meant for you. You begin to see happiness, not as something distant, but as something drawing closer with every breath. You begin to see yourself not as someone waiting endlessly, but as someone preparing intentionally. And preparation is powerful. It shapes you into someone capable of receiving what's coming without fear. It strengthens you so that happiness doesn't overwhelm you. It elevates you. It teaches you how to hold joy with gratitude instead of fear that it will disappear. And through all of this, the promise remains: one day of happiness is coming, not as a random moment, not as a fleeting escape, but as a divine appointment set for your life. And every step you take with that belief shapes you into someone ready for that day, someone who won't miss it, someone who won't sabotage, someone who won't fear it, someone who has walked through darkness long enough to recognize light when it finally appears. Hope begins the moment we choose to hear what we once ignored. It's strange how often the most life-changing messages don't come loudly. They don't roar. They don't shake the ground beneath us or flash across the sky in dramatic light. Instead, they come quietly, almost shyly, like a whisper brushing past the edge of our attention. And because they arrive without force, many of us spend years walking past them, stepping over them, or brushing them aside as if they were nothing more than passing thoughts. But January 20th, 2026 wasn't just a day. It was a reminder that sometimes the things we treat as background noise are actually invitations waiting for us to finally stop, finally listen, finally open the door to a new chapter. God said one day of happiness is coming, and some people heard that as a possibility, some heard it as a fantasy, and some didn't hear it at all. But the ones who did hear it, even faintly, felt something shift inside them. Because hope doesn't start with a guarantee. It starts with the decision to pay attention to the quiet nudges we once overlooked. We all have moments in our lives where we later say, I should have listened, or I knew deep down. We had instincts, emotions, signs, inner whispers that we ignored because they didn't feel logical, or they didn't match our fear, or they didn't align with the narrative we'd held on to for too long. Sometimes the voice of hope is drowned out by the louder voice of doubt. Sometimes the gentle pull towards something better gets overshadowed by the heavy weight of past disappointments. And sometimes we're so used to expecting the worst that we don't even bother entertaining the possibility of something good. But on days like January 20th, when something divine leans in and says one day of happiness is coming, it's almost like life gives us another chance to hear what we previously ignored. Not because we were incapable of hearing it before, but because we weren't ready. Because hope requires readiness. It requires a softened heart. It requires willingness to let go of the belief that nothing good can happen for us. And hope doesn't always arrive when things are going well. In fact, it often shows up in the exact moment we feel too tired to receive it. When our minds are noisy with stress, when our hearts are guarded, when our lives feel chaotic or confusing or directionless, it shows up when we least expect it, and that's exactly why we almost miss it. Because we assume hope comes wrapped in clarity and confidence. But it doesn't. Hope comes wrapped in vulnerability. It asks us to trust before we're ready. It asks us to listen even when we're hurting. It asks us to believe before there's evidence. And that's why choosing to hear it is so powerful. Because hearing something soft when your world feels loud is an act of inner strength. Hearing something gentle when your heart feels bruised is an act of courage. Hearing something promising when your mind is full of doubts is an act of faith. And what makes hope transformative isn't just hearing the message. It's allowing yourself to consider that it might be true. Because hearing is only the first step. The next step is letting the message land. Letting it echo somewhere inside you. Letting it disrupt the familiar patterns of hopelessness you've repeated so many times they feel automatic. And when God says one day of happiness is coming, that message has a way of slipping into the cracks of your heart. It doesn't need a wide open doorway. It doesn't need perfect conditions. It just needs one moment of stillness long enough for the whisper to be heard. And once you hear it, once you truly hear it, something begins to shift, even if you don't notice it yet. Maybe the shift starts as a question, what if something good is coming? Maybe it starts as a feeling, I think I needed to hear that. Maybe it starts as a tiny flicker in your chest, like the emotional equivalent of a small light turning on in a dark room. Whatever form it takes, hope begins the moment you choose not to ignore the message. And choosing not to ignore it doesn't mean you suddenly become optimistic. You don't have to start dancing in the streets or writing affirmations on your mirror. You don't have to pretend everything is perfect. Choosing not to ignore it simply means you're open to possibility again. And possibility is one of the most powerful forces in the human spirit. It breathes life into CES that felt numb. It awakens dreams that were buried under years of disappointment. It reminds you that the story isn't finished, even if you feel stuck in a difficult chapter. But the truth is, many of us are more comfortable with certainty than hope. Even if the certainty is painful, even if the certainty is limiting, because certainty, even gloomy certainty, feels safer than risking hope. If you expect nothing, you can't be disappointed. If you don't hope, you can't be let down. If you ignore the whisper, you can avoid the fear that it might never come true. But what we forget is that living without hope is its own form of pain. It's a slow, quiet ache that drains color from life. It makes even good moments feel muted. It makes time feel heavier. It makes us smaller than we were meant to be. And that's why choosing to hear the message, choosing not to ignore the whisper, isn't just about believing in happiness. It's about refusing to shrink your soul to fit inside your fears. It's about giving yourself permission to imagine again, to dream again, to trust again. Imagine someone tapping on your door every day with a gift. But you, assuming it's another bill or another demand or another problem, never bother opening it. You hear the knock, but you ignore it. And because you ignore it, you never discover what was meant for you. That's how many of us treat hope. It knocks softly, daily, quietly, through small blessings, through unexpected kindness, through intuition, through timing, through the inner pull towards something better. But we ignore it because it feels too fragile to trust. And yet the moment we stop ignoring it, the moment we pause and lean in and say, maybe this message is for me, something awakens inside us. We open the door, and what comes through is not just hope, it's energy, it's clarity, it's resilience, it's inspiration. It's the ability to take the next step because you finally believe there's something worth stepping toward. And when God says one day of happiness is coming, the message isn't about a single day. It's about what that message awakens in you. It's about the potential it stirs. It's about the shift in your inner posture. It's about the way your heart repositions itself toward expectation instead of resignation. The moment you choose to hear the promise is the moment you reclaim the ability to move forward with purpose. Because people without hope move slowly, they hesitate. They dwell on what they fear. They doubt every opportunity. They distrust every blessing. But people with hope move differently. Their steps are firmer. Their choices are bolder. Their hearts are open. Their eyes are clearer. They don't need everything to make sense to take the next step. They just need one spark to light their way. And that spark often begins with a message we once ignored. A message we didn't trust the first time. A message that felt too good to be true when life felt too hard. But the moment we choose to hear it, truly hear it, we begin to change. And the change is subtle at first. Maybe you start to wake up with a little more energy. Maybe you stop replaying the worst-case scenario in your mind. Maybe you start smiling without forcing it. Maybe you start speaking more gently to yourself. Maybe you begin reimagining your future. Maybe your body, tense for years, finally exhales. And these tiny internal shifts are the first signs that hope has taken root. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not fireworks, it's quiet alignment. It's the soul beginning to trust again. And when you begin to trust again, you start listening more closely. You start paying attention to the inner nudges. You start noticing the synchronicities. You start remembering moments in the past when you ignored similar messages and regretted it later. You start realizing that maybe, just maybe, hope has been calling out to you for a long time, and you were finally ready to hear it. And the readiness itself is a beautiful thing, because hope arrives when the heart is prepared. Hope grows when the heart becomes receptive. Hope expands when the heart chooses courage over comfort. Some people hear the message and dismiss it as wishful thinking. Others hear it and feel something resonate deep within them, as if the message confirmed a truth they always suspected but couldn't articulate. And others hear it and feel uncomfortable because hope disrupts the familiar patterns of despair they've built their identity around. But then the are the ones who choose to hear it wholeheartedly, the ones who decide that even if they don't fully understand it, they'll welcome it. The ones who decide that ignoring messages from above has never led them anywhere good, so maybe this time they'll listen instead. And those are the people whose lives begin to shift, not because the world around them has changed yet, but because their internal world has awakened to possibility, and the moment hope enters your internal world, your external world begins to respond. You begin attracting moments that align with the new energy you're carrying. You begin seeing opportunities you once overlooked. You begin meeting people who speak the same language of belief. You begin feeling gratitude for small things, and gratitude itself expands your capacity for joy. And the more your capacity grows, the more room happiness has to come in when the promised day arrives. Hearing the message is only the beginning, but it is the most important beginning, because a life without hope is a life lived in grayscale, but a life where hope is alive, even quietly, even softly, even tentatively, is a life that moves toward color, toward light, toward meaning. Hope doesn't erase pain. It gives pain a direction. It gives suffering a timeline. It gives struggle a purpose. It turns waiting into preparation. It turns endurance into strength. It turns the unknown into possibility instead of fear. And all of that begins not when happiness arrives, but when you hear the message that it's coming. When you choose to pay attention to what you once dismissed. When you decide that ignoring the whisper is no longer serving you. When you look at your own life and say, I've spent enough time expecting hurt. Now I'm ready to expect something good. That decision alone is powerful enough to change your entire trajectory, because life follows the direction of your attention. And when your attention shifts toward hope, even quietly, even imperfectly, everything inside and around you begins to adjust to that new direction. Preparation for joy is an act of courage. Most people don't think about it that way because we often imagine courage as something loud, running into danger, standing up to fear, taking big, bold, dramatic action. But the truth is, some of the greatest acts of courage happen quietly, privately, internally, in the hidden spaces no one else sees. And preparing for joy is one of those hidden acts, because preparing for joy requires you to believe that joy is possible. It requires you to open your heart when life has taught you to close it. It requires you to soften when disappointment has hardened you. It requires you to stretch your soul in ways that feel vulnerable after years of telling yourself not to expect too much. And on January 20th, 2026, when the message came that one day of happiness is coming, what it really activated inside us wasn't just anticipation. It was courage. Courage to prepare for something good without knowing when it will arrive. Courage to rearrange parts of your life for a blessing that hasn't shown up yet. Courage to hope without evidence, without guarantees, without clarity. Courage to get ready for joy as if you already knew it was on its way, because preparing for joy is very different from preparing for fear. Preparing for fear is easy. It doesn't require imagination. It doesn't require vulnerability. It doesn't require trust. Fear is familiar. Fear has been rehearsed. Fear blends in with old habits, old patterns, old narratives. But preparing for joy, true joy, is unfamiliar for many people, especially people who have lived through seasons where joy felt unreachable, especially people who have been disappointed so many times that expecting happiness feels dangerous, especially people who have carried burdens for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to put them down. And that's why preparing for joy is an act of courage. You're choosing to stand in a posture your past didn't prepare you for. You're choosing to lean towards something your fears tell you to avoid. You're choosing to get ready for something your wounds say won't come. That's courage. Quiet courage, soul courage. And when you receive a message like one day of happiness is coming, something inside you starts shifting in the direction of preparation. Not because the joy has arrived yet, but because your heart senses that something worth preparing for has already been spoken into existence. You don't prepare for what you don't believe in. You don't prepare for what you don't expect. Preparation itself is evidence of belief, evidence of trust, evidence of hope. And sometimes preparation is the first sign that your heart has decided to be brave again, brave enough to imagine a future that feels different from your past, brave enough to cleanse old wounds so new blessings have a place to land, brave enough to change your posture from defensive to open, brave enough to say, even if I've been disappointed before, I'm still willing to prepare for joy now. Preparation for joy can show up in so many subtle ways. It can look like cleaning the emotional clutter you've tolerated for too long. It can look like releasing bitterness that has taken up space inside your chest. It can look like forgiving someone, not because they deserve it, but because your heart deserves to be lighter. It can look like letting go of relationships that drain you, so you have room for relationships that uplift you. It can look like rearranging your life in a way that aligns with who you are becoming, not who you used to be. It can look like healing the parts of you that sabotage your happiness. It can look like practicing gratitude for small things so your spirit learns how to receive bigger things. It can look like speaking kinder words to yourself. It can look like allowing yourself to want things again. It can look like learning how to trust again. It can look like taking care of your body. It can look like dreaming out loud instead of keeping your desires hidden in fear. Every one of these choices is preparation. And every one of these choices requires courage. Because joy doesn't just show up in a life that has no room for it. Joy arrives where space has been created, where intention has been set, where the heart has been softened, where the spirit has been opened, where the walls have been lowered enough for light to get in. Many people think they're waiting for joy, when in reality, joy is waiting for them to become ready, not perfect, not healed, not flawless, just ready. Ready enough to receive, ready enough to welcome it instead of question it. Ready enough to embrace it instead of push it away. Ready enough to let it stay instead of doubting it at every turn. And readiness is not an accident. It's a practice. It's a choice. It's a daily decision to honor the message that one day of happiness is coming by aligning your life with the belief that you are worthy of receiving it. Preparation is not just about making space. It's about becoming someone who believes they deserve joy, because believing you deserve joy is one of the boldest acts of courage in a world that often teaches you to settle for survival. There are people who experience so much pain that they don't trust good things anymore. They don't trust blessings. They don't trust calm moments. They don't trust love. They don't trust peace. They don't trust happiness. They've been conditioned to brace themselves for loss, for failure, for disappointment. They've trained their minds to expect the worst so they won't be hurt by the unexpected. But preparing for joy asks you to do the opposite. It asks you to stop bracing, to stop expecting the worst, to stop assuming that happiness always comes with a catch, to stop rehearsing tragedy in your mind, to stop shrinking before life has even begun. Preparing for joy asks you to breathe differently, to think differently, to feel differently, to walk differently. And at first, it feels unnatural. It feels uncomfortable. It feels like trying on a new pair of shoes that don't fit yet. But the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Preparing for joy reshapes your posture. It opens your chest. It straightens your spine. It lifts your gaze from the ground to the horizon. It reminds you that life is not over, even when you feel stuck. It reminds you that blessings don't require perfection. They require openness, and openness is a form of bravery Courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving in spite of fear. It's preparing for joy even when fear tells you not to. Fear will whisper that you're being foolish, that you're setting yourself up for heartbreak, that you're going to be disappointed again, that joy is unpredictable and therefore unsafe. But courage whispers back with a softer voice, a steadier voice. But what if the message is true? What if joy really is on its way? What if happiness is already moving toward you? What if everything you've endured has been leading to this one day? What if preparation is the bridge between where you are and where happiness is waiting? Courage doesn't silence fear. It simply chooses a different voice to follow. And the moment you choose the voice of preparation, you begin walking toward joy in every decision. You start valuing your peace. You start protecting your heart. You start honoring your emotional boundaries. You start being selective about who gets access to you. You start letting go of the versions of yourself, hat were